He thought he had the perfect life. A loving wife, 2 wonderful kids, and a stable career. But one unexpected moment changed everything. A single conversation, overheard through an open window, revealed a betrayal so deep it could destroy him. But instead of falling apart, Daniel Harper made a decision. He would outplay the people who thought they had already won. And when the truth came out, no one was prepared for what happened next. Daniel Harper steered his sedan through the quiet streets of Brookridge, a peaceful suburb just outside the city. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the pavement as he turned into his neighborhood, a sense of satisfaction still lingering from the educational conference he had just attended. As a dedicated high school history teacher, these events were rare opportunities to refine his craft, bringing fresh insights back to his students. The digital clock on his dashboard read 5:15 p.m., earlier than expected. This unexpected change in schedule often meant he could surprise his children with a spontaneous trip to their favorite ice cream shop. As he pulled into the driveway of his 2-story brick house, he noticed a flicker of movement behind the sheer curtains in the living room. A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. He imagined his kids, Jake and Sophie, peeking out in excitement, eager to welcome him home. Reaching for his leather briefcase filled with notes and lesson plans, Daniel stepped out of the car, the cool autumn air carrying the distant scent of burning leaves. As he approached the front door, keys in hand, something made him pause. His wife, Lauren, was speaking inside. The partially open window let her voice slip through, but there was something unusual in her tone. Low, conspiratorial. He hesitated, barely breathing, as the words crystallized in the crisp evening air. Once he's finished paying for the kids' tuition, I'll file for divorce. Then, I'll make sure he has no choice but to leave everything behind. Adam and I will be set, and Daniel will be nothing but a memory. A cold numbness spread through his chest. His fingers froze over the doorknob, pulse hammering in his ears. The air around him seemed heavier, as if gravity had doubled. For a fleeting moment, raw fury flared inside him. A primal urge to burst through the door, demand answers, make her see the depth of her betrayal. But years of discipline, of carefully measured patience, held him back. He was not a man who acted without thought. Instead, he stepped away from the door, inhaling deeply through his nose. His body moved on autopilot, retracing his steps to the car. Sliding back into the driver's seat, he gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands before starting the engine. He needed space, distance, time to think. Driving aimlessly, he found himself at Fairview Park, a quiet place on the outskirts of town. It was nearly deserted at this hour, save for a few joggers and a woman walking her golden retriever. Parking near the duck pond, he stepped out and sat on a weathered wooden bench, staring at the water. The ripples fractured his reflection, much like his own life had just shattered before his eyes. His hands trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over Lauren's contact before he quickly scrolled past it. Calling her now would serve no purpose. Instead, he searched for another number. One he hadn't dialed in years but now needed more than ever. Julia Bennett, family law attorney. He tapped the call button. The line rang twice before a polished, professional voice answered. Julia Bennett's office. How can I assist you? Daniel forced his voice to remain level, though the weight of the moment pressed down on him. I need to schedule a meeting with Julia as soon as possible. It's regarding a divorce. A pause. The assistant's tone softened slightly. She has availability tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. Does that work for you? He exhaled slowly. Yes, that's perfect. Thank you. Ending the call, Daniel let the phone rest in his lap. Across the pond, a young couple walked hand in hand, laughing at something unseen. Their carefree happiness seemed almost foreign to him now. Had he and Lauren ever truly been like that, or had it all been an illusion from the start? A slow, cold determination settled over him. He had spent his life believing in fairness, in the integrity of marriage, in the simple decency of people. But that belief had cost him. He had trusted the wrong person. That trust would not be misplaced again. By the time he pulled back into his driveway, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of orange and purple in its wake. He took a moment to compose himself, forcing his expression into one of quiet normalcy before stepping inside. The familiar warmth of home greeted him, the scent of baked chicken, the faint hum of the television in the background. The moment he crossed the threshold, a small figure came racing toward him. "Daddy!" Sophie, her blonde pigtails bouncing, threw her arms around his waist. He scooped her up, pressing a kiss to her temple, inhaling the faint scent of strawberries from her hair. "Hey, princess, how was your day?" She launched into an animated retelling of her kindergarten adventures. As he listened, nodding at the right moments, his gaze flickered to Lauren. She stood by the kitchen counter, wine glass in hand, watching him with a carefully crafted smile. "Welcome home, honey," she said, stepping forward to kiss his cheek. "Dinner will be ready soon." Daniel forced a smile. "Sounds great. I'm just gonna freshen up first." As he climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, his mind was already racing ahead. The game had begun, and he had no intention of losing. The house was silent. The only sound came from the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards as Daniel Harper moved through the dimly lit rooms. Lauren had gone to bed, and the children were fast asleep. He sat at his desk, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating the determined set of his jaw. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, scrolling through financial records, transaction histories, and joint account statements. The numbers lined up neatly, yet something about them felt wrong. He had never paid close attention to these details before, but now, with a sharp, analytical gaze, he started noticing patterns. Small withdrawals, irregular transfers, expenses that didn't match the explanations Lauren had given. The reality settled over him like a heavy weight. She was already moving against him, setting the groundwork for a future where he was nothing more than a financial afterthought. The thought sent a pulse of cold anger through him, but he forced himself to remain composed. He needed facts, not emotions. Reaching into his desk drawer, Daniel pulled out a small, unopened box. Months ago, he had purchased home surveillance cameras, intending to install them for security purposes but never finding the time. Now, they would serve a different purpose. One by one, he placed them strategically throughout the house, small, inconspicuous devices hidden among bookshelves and decor. The living room, the kitchen, his home office. If Lauren and Adam continued their whispered conversations, if money continued disappearing from their accounts, he would have proof. At sunrise, Daniel was already on the road, heading out of town for his scheduled meeting with Julia Bennett. The law office, located in the heart of Ashford, stood in stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside him. He had deliberately chosen a firm outside of their community. If Lauren had friends in the legal field, he didn't want word getting back to her. The meeting was all business. Julia listened carefully as he laid out the situation, her pen moving swiftly over her notebook. She asked pointed questions, and he answered them all, recounting the betrayal in a controlled, measured voice. Her advice was clear: gather more evidence, track every financial move, and above all, remain composed. Lauren's strength lay in his perceived ignorance. If she thought he was still the trusting, oblivious husband, she would let her guard down. The next several days passed in calculated precision. At night, Daniel pored over financial records, tracing Lauren's actions with meticulous detail. He compiled transaction logs, saving copies of anything suspicious. During the day, he played his role flawlessly, going through his routines as if nothing had changed. Then, the first confirmation arrived. The surveillance footage showed Lauren in the living room, speaking in hushed tones over the phone. Her body language was relaxed, too assured. The conversation, though brief, was damning. She believed she was in control, that Daniel remained unaware of her plans. Watching the playback, Daniel sat motionless, absorbing the weight of what he had just witnessed. He had suspected, but seeing it made it real in a way that nothing else could. The woman he had built a life with, the mother of his children, was orchestrating his downfall with casual ease. Still, he did not react. Instead, he kept collecting information. More transactions, more records, more inconsistencies. By the end of the week, he had a growing archive of proof, an undeniable trail of deception leading straight to her. Each morning, he sat across from Lauren at breakfast, listening as she made small talk, pretending to be the devoted wife. He nodded at the right moments, even smiled when appropriate. She spoke of work, of errands, of dinner plans. The lies came easily to her. But Daniel had already seen the receipts for the hotel. He had already heard the late-night calls. The pieces were falling into place. And soon, she would realize just how wrong she had been to underestimate him. Daniel Harper had always believed that patience was a virtue. He had spent years teaching his students about history's greatest tacticians, those who had waited for the right moment before making their move. Now, he was applying that same discipline to his own battle. By the time the week ended, his collection of evidence had grown substantial. The surveillance footage revealed more than just Lauren's deception. It showed the depth of her betrayal. She moved through their home with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won, making late-night calls, shifting money, weaving a future that didn't include him. What she didn't know was that every step she took was being documented. Daniel kept up the act. At breakfast, he listened to Lauren's carefully constructed stories. She spoke of late meetings, of business trips that never existed. He nodded along, offering nothing more than a polite smile. At work, he remained focused on his students, determined not to let personal turmoil disrupt his career. Then came the first strike. A quiet afternoon found him parked a few blocks away from his house. From his vantage point, he had a clear view of his driveway. Minutes passed, then a sleek black car pulled up. Adam Weston stepped out, his designer suit crisp, his movements confident. Daniel watched as the man approached his front door. As Lauren greeted him with a smile that had once belonged to him, she let Adam inside, and the door closed behind them. Inside, the cameras captured it all. Their laughter, the exchange of whispered promises. They drank wine, Daniel's wine, a gift from a former student's family. They spoke freely, unaware that their own words would become the very tools of their downfall. Daniel had what he needed, but he wasn't finished yet. The next step was securing his position. He transferred funds from their joint account to a private one in his name, ensuring that Lauren wouldn't have unrestricted access. He compiled records of his income, expenses, and savings, everything needed to prove financial stability in court. He contacted their children's school and adjusted emergency contacts, limiting Lauren's influence where he legally could. A few days later, a meeting with Julia Bennett confirmed that the case against Lauren was airtight. The attorney reviewed the evidence, footage, financial records, documents proving her hidden transactions. She nodded, satisfied. "This isn't just a divorce case anymore," she noted. "This is fraud. This is premeditated financial deception. You're in a strong position, Daniel, but you need to keep playing along for a little longer." And so he did. Lauren continued believing she was in control. She left home on fabricated business trips, met Adam in places she thought were undiscovered. But Daniel knew. Every transaction, every text message sent from their shared phone plan, every movement recorded by the security cameras. Nothing escaped him. One evening, as Lauren was preparing to leave for another meeting, Daniel sat quietly in his study, reviewing footage from earlier that week. The camera in the living room had captured a conversation that changed everything. Adam, lounging on the couch, swirling wine in his glass, smirked. "Once everything's finalized, we'll sell the house. Take what we need. Daniel won't see a cent. It's all coming together." Lauren laughed, the sound cold. "He's so predictable, so trusting. He doesn't even realize what's happening." Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The weight of the moment settled over him, but it no longer carried anger, carried certainty. They had no idea what was coming. The next day, Daniel put the final pieces into place. The case against Lauren was stronger than ever. With Julia's guidance, the divorce papers were prepared. The evidence was organized into an indisputable file. He had taken every necessary precaution. Lauren had been preparing for the moment she would dismantle his life. She just hadn't realized he had been preparing, too. And when the truth finally came crashing down, it wouldn't be him left in ruins. Daniel Harper sat in his study, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The evidence was complete, the paperwork finalized, and the strategy set. Every detail had been accounted for. He had waited patiently, allowing Lauren to dig herself deeper into her own deception. Now it was time to act. The house was quiet, the evening settling in with the soft hum of the television from the living room where the children played. From the kitchen, he could hear Lauren moving about, pouring herself a glass of wine. The normalcy of it all was almost absurd. She carried on with her routine, blissfully unaware that within hours, her carefully constructed plans would collapse around her. His phone vibrated on the desk. Julia Bennett confirming that the legal filing was in motion. The divorce papers would be served in the morning, along with the financial documentation and the full record of her deception. The court would see everything. Daniel exhaled slowly. It was time. Rising from his chair, he moved through the house with deliberate calm. In the kitchen, Lauren leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. She barely glanced up when he entered, sipping her wine as if nothing had changed. She had no idea. For a moment he observed her. This woman he had once loved, now a stranger. The thought was fleeting. There was no room for sentimentality. He placed a thick folder on the counter, its weight landing with a dull thud. Lauren's brow furrowed as she set her glass down, her fingers hesitating before reaching for it. The silence stretched as she flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion, then to something far more telling, fear. The financial records, the hidden transactions, the documented meetings with Adam Weston, it was all there. And then, the surveillance transcripts, the recorded conversations, the irrefutable proof of her deception. She looked up, her face paling. For the first time, she had no words. Daniel remained silent, watching as realization dawned. He didn't need to say anything. The evidence spoke for itself. The tension in the room thickened as Lauren's grip tightened on the folder. Her breathing became uneven, and for a fleeting second, he saw a flash of something desperate in her eyes. She tried to recover, straightening her posture, but the damage had been done. She had lost. When she finally spoke, her voice was brittle. You had no right, but Daniel was already walking away. There was nothing left to discuss. Upstairs, he checked on the children, ensuring they were settled before returning to his study. His phone vibrated again, Julia's final confirmation. Everything was in motion. Downstairs, Lauren remained frozen in place, the weight of her actions crashing down around her. The deception was over. By morning, the legal battle would begin. But Daniel had already won. The courthouse loomed ahead, its stone facade bathed in the dull morning light. Daniel Harper walked up the steps, his mind clear, his posture steady. The weight of the past few months sat heavily on his shoulders, but there was no hesitation in his stride. This was the final step, the last battle in a war he never asked for but had been forced to fight. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with murmured conversations and the occasional shuffle of paperwork. His attorney, Julia Bennett, stood waiting for him near the courtroom doors, her expression as unreadable as ever. She had built a flawless case, a fortress of evidence that would ensure Lauren had no room for deception. A few feet away, Lauren Harper sat beside her lawyer. Her once carefully composed confidence was nowhere to be seen. Her shoulders were tense, her fingers tapping anxiously against her lap. She had spent weeks trying to counter the evidence, searching for loopholes, but the weight of her own actions had left her cornered. When the judge entered, the room settled into silence. The proceedings began in a blur of legal arguments and document submissions. Julia spoke with calculated precision, presenting financial statements, recorded conversations, and transaction logs. There was no room for speculation. Every accusation was backed by undeniable proof. Lauren's lawyer attempted to shift the narrative, citing stress and misunderstandings, but it was clear even to the judge that the defense was crumbling. The turning point came when the surveillance footage was played. Lauren's voice, her own words sealing her fate. By the time the judge delivered the ruling, the verdict was inevitable. Daniel was granted full custody of Jake and Sophie. The assets were divided in his favor, leaving Lauren with little leverage. Any attempt to falsely accuse him, any plan she had devised to take control, had been dismantled piece by piece. When the gavel struck, signaling the end, Daniel exhaled slowly, not in relief but in finality. As he stepped outside, the cold air filled his lungs, crisp and sharp. Julia walked beside him, tucking her notes away. "It's over," she said simply. Daniel nodded. Lauren had lost everything she had tried to take from him. But more importantly, he had reclaimed something far greater, his future. The weeks that followed were a slow but steady reconstruction of his life. The house felt lighter without the shadow of betrayal hanging over it. He settled into a new rhythm: work, school drop-offs, helping his kids with their homework. One evening, as he sat in his study, his laptop open, an idea began to take shape. Everything he had endured, every lesson learned, could serve a greater purpose. Within a few days, he reached out to others who had faced similar struggles. Conversations turned into meetings. Meetings turned into a support network. What had once been a personal battle became something bigger, a movement to help others navigate the same storm. Months later, an unexpected email landed in his inbox. A publishing house in New York had heard about his story. They wanted to discuss a potential book deal. Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering the offer. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Lauren anymore. It was about something greater, proving that no betrayal, no deception, no loss could define a person's future. The past was behind him. The future was his to shape. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready to move forward.